The skeleton's lantern. We were on our way back to Yuma following a futile attempt to find Pegleg's lost gold mine out in the heat and dust of the desert. We stopped to make camp for the night between a rock and a hard place, and soon my friend Eddie was snoring loud enough to wake the dead. I drifted off myself and started dreaming about the pretty girl I was engaged to marry. Suddenly, I was rudely awakened by a shout in my ear. I looked up into Eddie's ugly mug and almost slugged him. He was pretty panic-stricken about something, so I hauled myself up and looked around. Eddie was clutching his rifle and babbling away about a skeleton. I figured Eddie had a bad dream and I had just decided to give him a thrashing for waking me up when I saw the light. At first I thought it was reflective firelight, but the light was flickering oddly and seemed to bounce up and down. I grabbed my rifle and walked away from the fire towards the light. It was a lantern. A lantern suspended within the chest cavity of a huge skeleton. From the aimless, stumbling way it was walking, the light from the lantern wasn't doing the skeleton much good. I'd never admitted to Eddie, but the sight of that 8-foot-tall skeleton made my flesh creep. I told myself it was just Eddie playing tricks on me. To prove it, I took aim at the ghastly creature and fired off a couple of shots. The shots didn't faze the skeleton at all. In fact, my shots didn't even make the lantern flicker. That scared me. I knew then that this was no trick. It was some kind of terrible phantom stalking the desert at night. Well, we didn't fancy staying in a desert populated with 8-foot skeletons. We grabbed our packs and hightailed it out of there in the dark. As soon as we reached Yuma, Eddie hopped a stagecoach headed east. He had enough of lost gold mines and skeletons and was going home to work in his pa's store in New York. The Wailing Woman. Once a Spanish soldier married a beautiful native woman and they had 2 children whom the soldier loved very much. However, the soldier came from a rich family. His parents and relations disapproved of his wife and threatened to disown him unless he married a Spanish woman. Not wishing to lose his inheritance, the soldier put away his native wife and sent for a bride from Spain. The soldier's wife was filled with a terrible, jealous rage. To revenge herself against her unfaithful husband, she drowned their 2 children in the river. The soldier was horrified when he heard what she had done and tried to have her arrested. But his wife, driven insane by rage, jealousy, and guilt, escaped into the wilds. She roamed through the land, searching the waterways for her children. But she could not find them. Finally, in agony of body and mind, she drowned herself in the river too. But the woman's spirit could not escape to heaven because of the weight of her terrible crime. And so La Llorona, the Wailing Woman, spirit still wanders the earth, wailing in guilt and grief. She is condemned forever to search in vain for her children. But she will never find them, for they are no more. The Wampus Cat. They say that the Wampus Cat used to be a beautiful Indian woman. The men of her tribe were always going on hunting trips, but the women had to stay home. The Indian woman secretly followed her husband one day when he went hunting with the other men. She hid herself behind a rock, clutching the hide of a mountain cat around her, and spied on the men as they sat around their campfires telling sacred stories and doing magic. According to the laws of the tribe, it was absolutely forbidden for women to hear the sacred stories and see the tribe's magic. So when the Indian woman was discovered, the medicine man punished her by binding her into the mountain cat skin she wore and then transforming her into a terrible monster, half woman and half mountain cat. Ever after, she was doomed to roam the hills, howling desolately because she desires to return to her normal body. A man was hunting one night with his dogs when they both whimpered and ran off the path. At that moment, the woods were overpowered with a horrible smell like that of a wet animal that had fallen into a bog after it messed with a skunk. Then something howled on the path behind him and the man whirled around, dropping his rifle. His heart pounding with fear, the man found himself staring into the big, glowing yellow eyes of the Wampus Cat. The creature had huge fangs dripping with salvia. It looked kind of like a mountain lion, but it was walking upright like a man. Then it howled, and the man's skin nearly turned inside out in horror. With a scream of terror, the man leapt backwards and ran as fast as he could through the woods, the wampus cat on his heels. He fled to the home of a friend who lived nearby and burst through the front door only a breath ahead of the creature. His friend slammed the door in the face of the wampus cat. Instantly, it started shuddering under the weight of the attacking monster. The man's friend grabbed his Bible and started reading aloud from the Psalms. Upon hearing the holy words, the wampus cat howled in frustration and then slowly abandoned its attack and went back into the woods. The man spent the rest of the night at his friend's place. When he went home at daybreak, he found his dogs huddled in the barn, shaken but still alive. The man never hunted after dark again. Tolling of the bell. In the wee hours of Friday morning, October 7th, 1859, when all the good residents of Charlottetown should still be sleeping in their beds, a deep bell tone was heard from the bell tower in St. James Church. The somber sound rang out over the rooftops, waking many with the unexpectedness of its doom-laden ring. Then a second toll rang slowly overhead, followed by a third. Bewildered by the unexpected tolling of the bell, two neighbors who lived near the church hurriedly joined forces in the road outside their homes and went to investigate. Above them, the bell tolled for the fourth time, and again for the fifth time. As they entered the churchyard, the bell tolled for the sixth time, and the front doors of the church swung open with a windy blast. Framed in the doorway were three glowing women dressed all in white. The men gasped, unsure if they were seeing real women or angels. Overhead, the bell tolled for a seventh time, and the doors slammed shut as quickly as they had opened. The men raced to the doors and tugged on the handles, but they were firmly locked. When they peered through the windows, the men saw a glowing woman in white ascending the stairs to the belfry. The minister and the sexton arrived at that moment, demanding to know what the disturbance was about. The neighbors told the new arrivals what they had seen, and the minister unlocked the door to the church. As they entered the vestibule, they saw no sign of the women the neighbors had seen in the doorway. A quick glance through the church revealed not a living soul. As the men ascended toward the belfry, the bell tolled for the eighth time. They ran up the stairs, determined to confront the culprit and demand an explanation. When they reached the top, they found the belfry empty and the bell rope tied firmly in place, though the metal of the church bell was still vibrating slightly. Puzzled and frightened, the minister and his companions searched the church from top to bottom, but it was completely empty. As the bell gave no further sign of tolling, the men left the church, mystified by what had happened. That evening, the local passenger steamer between Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island called the Fairy Queen failed to arrive. The people of Charlottetown learned a few days later that the ship had sunk, killing the 8 passengers who had boarded her that day. It is said that the bell of St. James Church tolled 8 times on the day of the disaster, thus foretelling the doom of the 5 men and 3 women who would board the Fairy Queen later that day. Tommy Knockers. Tommy Knockers are the spirits of departed miners that help miners find ore. They also knock on the walls of the mines right before a cave-in. When you hear a Tommy Knocker knocking, it's best to depart the area right quick. They have saved the life of many a miner who has been in a danger. Some folks say that the very first man to hear the sound is jinxed, but that is not always the case. It's important to stay on the good side of the Tommy Knockers. Many miners leave a bit of their lunch for the spirits, and to please them, they fashion the little clay figures of their spirits. The Tommy Knockers can be spiteful creatures if they don't like you. One unlucky miner named Eddie became a target of the Tommy Knockers. They drove him crazy, pelting him with stones, stealing his tools, blowing out his lantern. He couldn't figure out why the Tommy Knockers had singled him out until one day he heard a voice calling to him from the dark opening of a nearby shaft. "Eddie, I want my $5, the Tommy Knocker said. Eddie was so startled he dropped his tools all over the ground. The voice sounded just like that of his old friend Joe, who had died in a cave-in a few months back. Eddie had borrowed $5 from Joe and had never returned it. Eddie went into the shaft, and sure enough there was Joe Trelawney's ghost, shrunk to the size of a 2-foot dwarf with a big ugly head, large ears, and a crooked nose. He wore a peaked hat, a leather jacket, and water-soaked leather boots. The Tommyknocker was not pleased to see Eddie. "Give me back my $5, Eddie," the ghost of his old friend demanded. "I don't have any money on me, Joe," Eddie said, patting his pockets for emphasis. "I've heard that before," said the Tommyknocker dryly. "I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now." The Tommyknocker disappeared into thin air, leaving an uneasy Eddie to wonder what the ghost would do next. He soon found out. All day long, Eddie was plagued by the Tommyknocker. His ladder was shaken so hard that he almost fell. The loud tapping noise of an invisible drill nearly drove him mad. He just missed being buried by a rock fall. And through it all, Joe's voice would taunt him, "Give me back my $5, Eddie." "All right, Joe, all right." Eddie finally yelled into the mouth of the tunnel where his friend had appeared. "I'll get your bloody $5. Abandoning his work for the day, Eddie made the long climb to the surface and took $5 silver from the money box he kept under a loose board in his bedroom. Then he climbed back down into the mine and stuck the $5 into a crack in the wall next to the place Joe's spirit had appeared to him. "There's your $5, Joe," Eddie shouted, his voice echoing oddly in the dark tunnel. "It's about bloody time," Joe said, appearing next to him and peering critically into the crack where the money lay. "Are you going to leave me alone now?" Eddie asked. The Tommyknocker grinned impishly at Eddie. "Maybe," he said. He scooped up the $5 silver and disappeared into the dark. Trapper's Ghost. There once was a trapper who roamed the wilds of Labrador on a sleigh pulled by 8 pure white huskies. He was a tall man, dressed in layer upon layer of animal skins, who drove his team with a terrible ferocity across the frozen tundra. The trapper was a cruel man, and the people in the local towns did not like him, but they tolerated his company when he came to town because of the rich animal skins he brought with him. When he came to a town, the trapper would sell his skins and then drink away his money at the local tavern. When he wasn't drunk himself, the trapper assaulted the local women, picked fights with the hard-working townsmen, and tried to sell alcohol to the natives. After a few days of such behavior, the constable would toss the trapper out on his ear. Then the trapper would resume his roaming and trapping until he came to another town. No one knows exactly how the trapper met his fate, although it was rumored that he went a little too far in his pursuit of a local innkeeper's fair wife and was shot to death by her disgruntled husband. Other folks say he lived to an old age and died on the trail. But it swiftly became clear that death did not end the roaming of the cruel trapper. Each winter, the trapper's ghost roams the wilds of Labrador on a sleigh pulled by 8 white huskies. They say that his spirit was refused entry into heaven and remains forever in Labrador, atoning for the many sins he committed during his lifetime by helping lost travelers find their way home. Many a weary soul has looked up from their frantic circling to see a large sleigh pulled by white dogs coming toward them. If they follow it, they are led to safety. Once a lost trapper found himself caught in a terrible blizzard, far from the nearest town. As he sought in vain to find a place to shelter from the storm, the phantom trapper appeared with his sleigh. Animal skins flapping in the raging wind and blinding snow, the phantom tenderly lifted the nearly frozen man, placed him among the rugs on his sleigh, and drove the dying trapper to the nearest town. The phantom carried the man right into the inn, placed him gently on a chair by the door, summoned the innkeeper to care for the man, and then vanished right before the astonished innkeeper's eyes. Turnabout is fair play. Everyone laughed at Jumpy Uncle Phil, who believed the world was largely populated with monsters and ghosts and spooks and witches and werewolves. But he was considered harmless, and no one much bothered about the poor fellow. Until one summer when a new family moved to town with 2 naughty sons. As soon as they learned about Jumpy Uncle Phil, those boys became obsessed with tormenting him. They snuck out to his place one night and painted hex signs over his barn. When Uncle Phil woke up the next morning, he ran all the way to the church sure the devil was out to steal his soul away. The old man wouldn't leave until the minister went out and blessed his house. A week later, the boys gathered all of the black cats in town and put them into Uncle Phil's house. When Uncle Phil opened the door, fur flew everywhere as the black cats hissed and bit. Uncle Phil ran back to the church, and minister had to bless the house all over again. Then one night, they snuck in Uncle Phil's house through the parlor window, dragging a scarecrow with them. They set up the scarecrow so that it loomed over the poor sleeping man. Then they sunk out and positioned a lantern on a tree branch so that the light illuminated the scarecrow's face. The boys started moaning and groaning and calling Uncle Phil's name from the yard outside his bedroom window. Uncle Phil woke with a gasp and then screamed in sheer terror. Leaping off the bed, he dove out of his bedroom window and climbed into the tree. Below him, the lantern fell to the ground, setting fire to the woodpile beside the house. The boys stopped laughing and ran to the barn for something to put out the fire. Together, they managed to put it out, but the side of the house was scorched. The boys snuck into the house and removed the scarecrow before hightailing it home. In the morning, Uncle Phil came down from the top of the tree and went to fetch the preacher. Uncle Phil's house was sure devil had come and tried to take away his soul. The minister had to perform a third ritual cleansing of the farm before Uncle Phil would return to his property. The boys figured they'd better lay low for a while after the fire, so life went back to normal for Uncle Philosophy. Then, about a month after the devil's visit, Uncle Phil passed away in his sleep, and the boys were sure it was their fault. They felt terrible about it, but what could they do? Uncle Phil was gone. 2 weeks after Uncle Phil's death, the boys woke to find their bedroom full of black cats. The boys were alarmed and could not convince their parents that they did not know how the cats got there. Then the boys came home from school one afternoon to find X signs painted on their barn. The boys yelled in terror and ran inside their house, completely spooked. Later that night, the boys woke to hear a voice moaning their names. They sat up in their beds and saw the illuminated figure of a scarecrow looming in the center of the room. The boys screamed in terror. "I have come for your soul," it moaned, waving its arms about. The boys screamed again. Then the scarecrow started laughing. One arm reached up and snatched off the scarecrow's head, revealing the glowing, partially transparent face of Uncle Phil. "Gotcha," said the ghost of Uncle Phil with a huge grin. After all, turnabout is fair play. Laughing and crying, the boys had to agree. And they never played practical jokes on anyone again.